Oh, hello, my friends. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. We got like 50 plus questions for today. So I guess we'll try to rapid fire through some things. I'll bring Jon on right away. Let me grab Jon. Oh, wait, does he have to request me? Oh, there we go. Bring him on.
Now, what's up, everybody? How are you? What's going on? Woot woot. What's happening?
What up?
How are you?
I heard you say we got 50 questions.
Yeah.
Let's get them all. Let's make it a goal to get every single one answered with some sort of answer.
Well, the good news is many of them overlap.
Okay.
So there's a lot of the same sort of questions. But first off, how are you?
I'm good.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm all right.
You look focused and ready to go.
I am. I am. I'm good to go. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good.
You've been sprinting again. How do you feel?
I've been sprinting again. I feel great. The sun has come back out the last couple of days, trying to get it in. Fully vaccinated, going to New York next week.
Oh, sick.
Ready to seeing some friends, giving some hugs, doing the thing, man. It's nice. I know we talked about this a little bit maybe last week, and I know a lot of people are still behind on things opening up and vaccinations and whatnot, but it does feel like the world is heading in the right direction. So feeling good about that. But yeah, man. So I guess this whole hour, if you're still down, we got
I'm down. I'm excited.
Of people
nervous, but excited.
All the questions that people want to ask that usually we're not super excited about answering, but we're just going to go through it. The number one question asked in many different ways.
The number one question.
What is your vocal chain? What is the latest vocal chain you have? What is exactly your vocal chain? What do you exactly do? Show me all your settings. Give me all of your Pro Tools sessions. Yeah.
What
What
exactly do you do on your vocals? That's the question.
Yeah. So
exactly. Should I go to a session? Should I open up a session?
I mean, if you feel like it, I know there's people that would like it. There's been lots of people asking. You and I have talked about this on the lives before about you doing a mix Twitch stream or something like that. And I keep saying when the next time or the first time, I guess technically, you and I work on a song together, maybe we'll do a Twitch stream of it and talk through it. But
okay.
knowing.
My vocal chain. Go for it. Let's do it. Let's just go in on it. Okay, so the first thing I do is I put a filter on the vocal. Oh my God, I love this. This is gonna be the worst and best episode we've ever done.
Yeah, the people wanted it. Here we go.
I know.
We'll talk through it one at a time because I'm sure I'll be like, okay, why do you do that? And that. By the way, I do that too. So you're lopping off low end, I assume you're filtering.
Yeah, and high end. Up to 100 usually, sometimes 120 depending, and then down to maybe 20K, 25K, or just some sort of high cut as well. The low one makes sense to me because booms and people knocking the mic. And plosives, P's and B's. Yeah.
There's nothing in a vocal track that's going below 100 cycles. Even the lowest singer, it's extremely unlikely. Maybe there's some energy there sometimes for some vocals, but not really useful.
It's just you're competing, with other stuff that doesn't need to be there.
Why the high end filter?
Focus.
Okay.
There's nothing above that you need either, right? So it's the same concept. Other things exist up there, dog frequencies, there's no need for that. You can't hear it. It presents the vocal in a more focused position when doing that. But we didn't get through the chain. So these questions all tally up to something. You can't just, it's absolutely not one thing doesn't do the thing, right? So we'll start there. Then I put my DW Fern VT7 on it, or the Unfair Child. So then it goes to an analog situation. Maybe a de-esser before, maybe after, depending on how well it was recorded. So that's not always.
Let's go one at a time here. So both the VT Fern piece of gear and the Unfair Child are outboard
analog tube
limiters. So they have some limiting compression. I know you've talked about it before. You don't do
there's no ratio.
You're not doing a ton of gain reduction with them. It's more for the harmonics, and maybe it evens out a little bit because, again, harmonic saturation has a compressing effect to it.
If someone says, I've heard Serban goes to 16, similar concept. Yes.
Filtering.
You can, yeah, filtering. You can go to anything that the vocal or the song needs, right? I'm sure he goes to 18. He might go to 14. He might even go to 10. And I might even go to 12. You know, yeah. The concept is that's how you focus the record. Like Kendrick Lamar doesn't have anything above 14K in his vocal. Like that's
and again
that's a good example to listen to versus a pop record that we're talking about. Servant. It's way more distinct and obvious on a Kendrick Lamar vocal. It's way more bandpassed. He is the only thing in this mid-range space, and that's filtering. That's also potentially the mic that it's recorded on and where his nasal tone is a lot of the time, but it's filtered, it's bandpassed. That's the concept. Yes.
There were two quick things. One, somebody just asked in the chat, and somebody asked when you're filtering, thanks, how many decibels per octave are you doing super hard?
I don't even care.
Yeah,
don't know.
Based on the sound, maybe it's
12, 24 on the top. It could be 6. Like
So
I don't know the answer to that. Yeah.
One of the things about filtering is it's not just eliminating frequencies, but it creates both the appearance of, and because of a phase shift, it actually changes the audible signal as well.
Yes, and we'll get there. We'll get there.
We're
not done with that.
Just important to people to know that it's not just about taking off frequencies. There's phase things that happen too. But so continue.
Yeah. So then,
and it depends on slope too. Things get more and less dramatic based on the cue and the slope.
Exactly. So that's a later thing, right?
So de-esser is a plugin, I assume. I assume.
Yeah, the Weiss de-esser. Okay. I'll use that pre or post the analog gear depending on the quality of source material. If it's not very SE, then there's no need to do it until I'm, doing my analog warmth to it. There's no need to do more before that. I try to do the least possible. So when we get through this chain, we're almost done. Like what I'm talking about now, we're probably about halfway through and we've talked about 3 things.
I love it.
So the de-esser will be pre or post, but a lot of times it's clip gain. So into this step now, after the filter, is where we've talked about this many, many times. This is where I clip gain. This is where I'll adjust S's, consonants. So
you will print back into the computer and then clip gain the resulting thing.
No, into the analog gear.
I see.
I
so
want
you
to hit the analog gear even and already dynamically controlled. So it hits the tubes as even as, I can possibly get it on first attempt.
Yeah.
And then of course, yes, afterwards there's broad stroke clip gaining after that, but it's more nitpicky clip gain into it. If something is really dynamic where I can do a quick cheat, the one thing I'll throw in there before that, and this is not always, we're talking about the always, this is not an always, the Faraday limiter, I will do a bit of a hard clamp on before the gear if something is way too raw and dynamic. If it's like mic technique issues where it's just like it's just so out of whack, I'll handicap myself and I'll give myself a handicap.
So you haven't clip gained yet. You'll put these things on as a general thing, and then you'll go back and clip gain into them.
Into all of them.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting.
Depending on how dramatically dynamic these things are, and that's usually a bad vocal producer. It is just very rare. The people I'm working with, that's usually taken care of at this point. Yeah, very rare. That's why I'm like, that's a little more of an anecdote. Like sometimes I have to do this.
And one thing I want to say really quick is it sounds like we're already into, this is a framework, but there's lots of different ways you might adjust, and you might do clip gain and then go back, and people need to understand that, again, because a lot of people, it's why we hate answering these questions, is because it's like, this isn't the way to make something sound good. Yes. This is a way that you've built a framework over years, and you keep adjusting.
That's why this episode is called The Worst Questions. What does John do on his vocal chain? It's like,
all right, so sorry, keep going. Keep going.
So after that, it could be done. That could be it. I would say I would do a transient shaper after that.
What does that achieve on a vocal?
More transients after any limiting, any loss of through saturation, any loss of transients through whether it's the tubes or the Faraday.
We're talking about clarity of words and sibilance and rhythm
all that
and
stuff that people like about the fake transient of the all buttons in 1176. When you hear a vocal that does that, the transients are gone. They're not actually there. That's this pushed, compressed energy that people think is transients. It's actually lack of transients. So if I'm trying to emulate something of the sort, I'll use that to do like really aggressive transients. I would also say that's on every vocal is the spectral shaper in the upper mid-range. So I'm not doing too much EQ reduction and more spectral shaping and control, kind of like what people use Soothe for. We've talked about this in previous episodes. I use the spectral shaper. I think it has less phasing issues. It's
the
less
spectral shaper is what plugin?
Ozone
Spectral Shaper.
So I think I could it's less mysterious to me. Soothe is mysterious. Nobody actually knows what it's doing. And if you can tell me, like, please give me a nice like white paper on what Soothe is actually doing, and I'll be very impressed with you. I use the spectral shaper because it's less mysterious. I can hear what it's doing. I could hear what the tone control and the character is doing. It's very clear to me when it's too far. You know, with Soothe, I think you go too far, you don't realize you go too far, and then you have to keep checking yourself. So that's my way of controlling upper mid-range. If it's a bad recording, then there's some dramatic subtractive EQ before the tubes. Like on the same Pro Q3 that I'll do the filtering that I started this question with, then I'll do some reductive, subtractive EQs before the gear if there's problems. Again, I'm not really dealing with too many problematically recorded vocals often. I'm lucky. I have. And every once in a while, it's like, whoa, this is crazy. And like so much 4K.
Oh, I just lost you. Can you hear me?
20 minutes away, if that's probably the call for that.
Oh,
thank you.
We're back. Got you.
We're back. I had a call.
You must have got a call.
So there will be reductive EQ in that area as well. Then I'm going to flip everyone here and just say, now that I've done these kind of more broad stroke moves, sometimes something really wants a really compressed sounding vocal every once in a while. So I've talked about this. I wrote a poem about it. I'll use the Ozone dynamics in Ozone 9 before the transient shaper sometimes to give a little bit of that extra clamped energy, depending on the genre, depending on the goal, depending on what I think someone else wants. It's less about what I want in that case, and it's more what I'm pretty sure they're gonna miss, from the rough or I'm just trying to find my own way to give that energy without like a sound of a compressor. Again, we've talked about compression for episodes on episodes. I'm not looking for the sound of compression. I'm looking for the functionality of it and the energy if it needs it, and getting the sound from other things.
I have a question about how vocals are delivered to you and how your engineer sets it up. And I think this will help a lot of the questions that people are asking here. I think the vast majority of people who are asking questions about what's your vocal chain are not getting, A-level recorded vocals. They don't have someone helping them set up a session. They're, mixers that haven't gotten to your level yet and have someone who's setting up something consistent for them. So they are getting vocals that are recorded worse, and often might be getting absolutely raw vocals. And you've already talked about you may use certain things. Can you speak on the people that are in more of that position where, because you are basically getting a mix with the rough, essentially the rough mix coming up to you.
Like, which can be bad. Which can be bad.
Which can be bad.
I would say there's actually there's no mystery. I'm not really talking mysteriously. I would just say everything I'm doing, I'll have to do more of.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That's a great answer.
I'll do the same things, just more of it. I'll use more spectral shaper on the upper mid range if it's recorded way too harsh. I'll use more subtractive EQ in that area. I'll use more control in the low mids before the gear if it's too boxy feeling and they recorded too close to the mic. I'll use, and
oftentimes you're doing that dynamically, right?
Yes.
You're cutting in a dynamic fashion with Pro Q3 oftentimes.
Yeah, I've changed that.
Okay, interesting.
I've changed that.
So you'll do that when it's necessary, but maybe not as much as you used to.
Yeah, I overused it. Again, we talk about this. I overused when that tool was presented to us. I overused it, and now I use that mostly in mid-range and high-end. Oh, sorry, upper mid-range and high-end, where things are faster and you can't really perceive the difference as quickly, versus low-end and low-mids move slower. I feel like I can hear the movements, the algorithm kind of working a bit too much, where I might just want to cut that frequency out in the low mids, cut it out in the low end. Like, it sounds, it's a dangerous thing in like the lower frequencies. There's distortion happening that's unwanted.
You talked about, I'm trying to think of, because we talk so much about not using a compressor as your main thing to do compression, but as we talked about, those that haven't watched it, our hour on compression, talking about the idea of dynamic range compression using tools other than a compressor. It sounds like you have 3 or 4 things in your chain: spectral shaper, dynamic EQ, tubes, limiters, doing little bits of things here and there, that to me add up to, that's your sum total of your dynamic range control. So that's an important thing for people to realize, that like all these tools they add up to something really important.
I'm glad you pointed that out. Yes. Pretty much everything I talked about is controlling dynamics. So depending on...
So really you love dynamic range compression. You love compression, but not compressors. Sorry, I wanted to put dynamic range control.
Yeah, without a compressor.
Yes, without a compressor.
No, it's very specific. It's another way to do it because we can see it. We can touch each syllable now. We could for decades. But I think now it's like, okay, cool. Well, I can see it. I can click gain. Why not try this?
Yes.
It sounds like, it just sounds more realistic, less space agey, less, how did he do that? It's like, oh, that sounds attainable. Like, let's not have secrets.
Yes.
This is easy. This is actually easy. It just takes time. Like what I just presented, those 4 or 5, bits of the chain, those are easy. I'm not like splitting the vocal into 3 things and only treating the high end here and the low end here. And then this one goes to a chorus and this goes to a reverb. It's like nothing is complicated. So to answer the questions as honest as possible, really what the takeaway should be is that nothing's that complicated.
Yep.
It's just time.
Just time. And I wanted to ask really quickly about clip gain, because you mentioned, you said the Weiss de-esser is the one you like. How much are you clip gaining S's and breaths and things like that?
A lot.
Quite a bit. Yeah, me too.
Quite a bit.
People were asking about that. How much are you doing? Like, I'm trying to not rely on a de-esser really at all, because of course it manipulates the high end and there's a phase relationship, and sometimes I use it and sometimes it's necessary, but you can clip gain S's and T's and breaths, and again, that's a form of dynamic control.
Everything, whether it's me or Josh, one of us does it, both of us. It might be so bad that he'll be at home and I'll say, hey, I'm not going to commit the Unfairchild or the VT7 just yet. Can you do another pass where you go deeper on the S's, then send it back to me just so I don't have to spend the time? But one of us will do it on every song.
Yeah.
And breaths too. And sometimes you want to clip gain the breaths up because of, there's no like, oh, we're only reducing. A lot of times I'm clip gaining consonants up or beginnings of phrases up.
Or taking a T from later in the song and putting it in this part. Or when they repeat the vocal on the chorus, let's have the same word sound a similar way.
Yes.
That's a big part of clarity of vocals.
So yeah, that's a big part. What else? I think that's the end of my chain. I think it's 6 things.
I think that's good. Let me see if there was any sort of addendums to that. And there's going to be more stuff here, but there's lots of, I think that covers it pretty well. If you guys in the chat, if we missed something on the basic.
A filter with subtractive EQ, maybe a de-esser before or after the analog stage of tubes. 2 options for that for me, which is Unfairchild or the VT7. It's been the VT7 recently. The needle doesn't really move. It's really for tone.
So VT7 is a tube analog limiter?
Yeah, it's a limiter. Yeah, there's no ratio control. And after that would be, either the de-esser or the spectral shaper. The spectral shaper could be before this as well. It's usually not, but it could be.
And that's like a harmonic saturator type of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've used that one. That's in Ozone.
And then, we left out a key. Shit, my bad. Let's, Spectre.
Spectre.
The Spectre on the vocal.
I was going to ask about that,
After all this reductive, that's the only additive move. Sorry, guys. I actually missed on two things.
People will forgive you.
One being Spectre for a mid-range present boost. After reducing all the harshness, I'll boost either in the solid mode or the warm mode or the clean mode, depending, and I'll try them all to see which one pushes it forward without bringing back a lot of the stuff that I took out, but in a very broad, wide Q sense to give that basically that perceived volume thing. So I'll get the vocal to sit in the mix with reduction and subtractive, and then I'll do one broad boost. That's almost like volume for me.
Yeah, it's like a real vocal energy frequency range.
Yes, and not to go back even further, but that filtered top end thing that we talked about, the reason why I do that and change the slope and the frequency throughout the mix is on the analog mix bus itself. I am doing a high end boost, and I'm doing it specifically for the vocal. So I have the Fern VT5 on the mix bus, and I'm listening to it on the vocal. So I filter with a plugin because I'm doing a phase bump there where the high-end boost on the VT5 is doing some heavy lifting for the overall presence of the track, but I'm listening to it on the vocal specifically to get that height on the vocal.
So let's clarify that, and then let's.
Then we got to move on because it's only one question, and we're
Well, this is like we're going to basically do like half the questions right now because it's vocal stuff, specific things about compression, and then do you want to say anything about delays, reverbs? You usually have stuff like that in the session from the rough mix, but do you have just off the top sort of standard stuff you like?
Yeah,
I think we like the same stuff.
I have the Liquid Sonics Seventh Heaven.
It's great.
I like the Sunset Chamber. It's a classic preset. Burkasti. It's like 95% there, according to Mick Wazowski and others. Like, it's pretty close. Like, he stopped using his, and that's pretty much an identity thing for him and his vocals on. And he, for recallability factor and how authentic it actually is, they killed it. So I use that Sunset Chamber. I changed the decay time on every song. I think it starts on my template at 1.8 seconds, but I'll wind up at longer or shorter.
So real quick, why change? Explain to people why you changed the decay time of a reverb.
Tempo.
That's great. That's exactly.
Tempo and how dense the production already is. If the production is too dense, you don't want anything long clouding it up. You want that shit to feel poppy and fresh and dancing. And if something is more open, you might want a long, dark, lush verb that creates some mystery in the background and fills space. But yeah, tempo and density. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Seventh Heaven, I know at least recently you've liked the Valhalla delay, which I've been having fun with.
Valhalla tape delay, I really, really like. I have a quarter note, an eighth note, and a half note in the template for different purposes. With different.
Do you process them at all? Do you process them?
I'll filter, but I filter, and I'll usually put like an Uber mod on with some sort of phaser or chorus or some modulation on them.
Modulation and delay is a great classic thing. It's those like rolling chorus echoes, tape echoes. They all have weird sort of modulation and wobble to them, which some delays have built in. But it's cool to
just do something more.
The question right on the chat there: how do you keep layered reverbs from clouding up in a mix? A big part of it is delay time, and how things are pre-delay and decay.
Yeah, pre-delay and decay time. Pre-delay. I'm a long pre-delayer. I would identify as a long pre-delayer. 40 milliseconds kind of shit.
Yeah. And it's a big part of it depends on tempo too. So how things are kind of slapping and moving. So decay time, how much delay you have, pre-delay on reverbs, how much like echo, chorus echo type delay, all really affect the tempo and the feel of the song and how things are running into each other.
Then I have the two other things. It's a very small template. So the Burkasti, those three delays, and then I have another reverb, which is the Goodhertz mega verb, and it's a very affected verb. It's very like dense and distorted and long. It's like it starts at 4 seconds, but I feel like it's longer than 4 because it has some saturation built in that just kind of keeps the tail up. And that's for throws. That's for like ad lib throws or some more wild shit. Just to, like
the Travis Scott.
The Travis Scott, exactly. So yeah. So that kind of thing I just have. That might change, and I might do another version of it. But if I want to free flow and just hear that idea, I send it to that really quick, just so I can have that vibe. I might come back and change it, but that's like the vibe setter for the throw.
Can I just throw one thing in with this, which is a Waves plugin? So plug your ears. The Waves True Verb has a Millennium Verb preset that goes on forever and ever. Yeah, so it's things like that. Like
Millennium.
Everybody should. It's a great tool that should be in everybody's bag. Having your like absurdly long reverb for a throw, for a clap, for a
the Millennium Verb is a bit too hi-fi for me. It sounds like really clean. I think that's why I changed it to this. It has more distortion control built in the plugin. That's I think why I like it. But yeah, you could take the Millennium Verb and put a Saturn or something or a decapitator and get some vibe on it. But the preset itself, Millennium Verb, always felt a little sterile to me. So I was always looking for another tool. But exactly, that's what that replaced. And then the last thing is the H3000 micro shift preset, which is, plus and minus 9 cents
on each side.
On either side. And then I have 3 different preset starts that are 3, 6, and 9. So the standard one, the default is 9, and I have a 6 and a 3 preset as well. That gives me a little bit more flexibility over like how delayed and how out of tune things are. Maybe the doubles want to be more of a 3, and the ad-libs want to be a 9. Maybe the guitar wants to be a 6, so I'll change that accordingly. But I have one that's there always.
How much are you Great. How much are you using that for a thickness versus stereo? Do you ever use that and keep it mono? So I think of like
always stereo.
It's basically to mildly stereoize something.
I have a very large dip at about 500 to 700 hertz, like really deep. So I'm not getting more of that buildup in the mid range. So it's more of a hollow sounding wide thing. So it's very out of the way of the mono. It's the complete opposite. It's fully wide and lows and highs. Like so big smiley bass. Plug-in or hardware? Great question. I rented the hardware for the Khalid album years ago, and we A-B'd it. Yeah, and we A-B'd it, and it's a digital piece of gear. It's the same. It just used the plugin. It was like it wasn't worth buying, for the recallability, and we had to print it back in every time. The plugin sounds great. The Eventide one, I don't know what other ones there are. I use the actual Eventide one, which is the same.
Yeah, somebody asked, that's just on vocals. I think you just said you'll use it on vocals, but also on guitars and keyboards.
Guitars. But I have one in the template that's for vocals specifically, just for the widening effect with that EQ on it. But I use that a lot. It's one of my
I wanted to point one thing out there that you said, which people may have missed and actually said about a few of these things. There is a lot of EQing and filtering going on when adding vocal effects, whether it's reverb, delays, but especially like the H3000. Always. If you're stereoizing something, you're going to run into phase shit. Anytime you're delaying something, you're pitching something, there are going to be weird phase relationships. Oftentimes that's part of the cool sound. And of course, doing slight delays and slight pitching is how you get chorus and phaser and flanger and all of that. But if you're just trying to widen a vocal, there's very subtle ways you can mess with the delay and the pitch, and then EQ, and you add air, you add mid-range, you can add different amounts of stereoization.
Yeah,
and so that's an important thing.
Put it this way, I would be a little bit careful with redundant frequencies in wideners and verbs and effects. I don't want the same frequencies in the effects that I do in the dry signal. So that's how I would consider it more conceptually. If I have a vocal that's really aggressive in 2K, I don't want that in the reverb. I want that. I want the higher frequencies. Maybe I want the 4K. Maybe that brightness is not coming from the lead, from the dry. It's coming from the effects. So there's not double up. You're not doubling up on frequencies. And then I think that's a good, clean way to think about what we're talking about for people that are messing with adding. Anything you add, you have to understand that there's going to be some subtraction that needs to happen, because you're just going to be doubling up on things. Anything in parallel is another version of what was already there. Mm-hmm. And if you already liked what was there, you might not want that much more of it, because you've already sculpted that. Like I always mix the vocal dry first. No matter what the genre is, I get my vocal mix without reverbs on. Like I just did this thing, and
that's a good one.
The artist brought up to me, she's like, I kind of like the slap delay that we put on, but I'm also like kind of down for it to be bone dry. And I was like, oh my God, when I started mixing it, like I mixed it bone dry first, and it just sounded a little bit more unique. And then we kind of came up with this like, oh, in the chorus, it's actually really nice to go to the slap delay here, or maybe we do it for the pre-chorus and then, you know, in the chorus back to dry. Like we can now mess around with that because I've made the vocal sound confident without any effects. So that's kind of my go-to in general. But most of the time, the effects wind up going back on. I just like to EQ and make those moves, you know, on the dry vocal.
Absolutely. And it's the two things I want to point out from what you said is when talking about time-based effects, it's important to manipulate both the frequencies that are coming back because you're going to be building things up and the time. I mean, they're time-based effects. So not just how long is the delay or how long is the reverb, but what does the tail feel like? Is it more gated? Is there a pre-delay? How many delays are coming off your, you know, Valhalla tape delay, and what happens to the delays? Are they full audio signal? Do they get smaller in frequency range? All these things are important and worth playing with. Depend on the tempo of your song, depend on the style of music. They're all elements that, again, the reason why you're good at this is you've spent a lot of time and you know all of the variables, or many of the variables anyway. So it's just important for people to think about that. The other thing which people ask about is mix bus, which you just talked about for a second, but maybe can you go through your standard mix bus, plugins, hardware, etc. We'll do the same thing.
Yeah.
That's the vocal.
It's going to be really disappointing.
I know. We've talked about it before.
Well, my VT5 is my Fern VT5 is not disappointing, and that is
which is an EQ.
It's an EQ,
a tube EQ, an outboard tube EQ.
Yeah. Which I'm doing a low and high boost and a high cut. So the low boost is at 20 hertz, but it's a Pultec style, so it's pretty broad. So it could, you know, maybe it goes up to 60 or 100 depending, and I'll do anywhere from 2 to 8 dB depending on what the song needs, and or nothing, or just keep it lean and let it hit the tubes. There's a mid cut at 400 hertz, usually out, sometimes in -2 dB, usually out. And then there's a high boost at, I believe it's 16K, and a high cut at 28K, whatever that means. You know, so that's that phase bump that we're doing. That's that focus. That's that Nyquist frequency, you know, where the human ear is actually like connecting on the focal point. So that's messed with a lot. That's like changed all the way to right before the bounce. I might just try, say I'm at 2 dB boost at 16 and like -10. Before I bounce, I might do a 4 dB boost and go to -14 on the cut. I might go all the way up on the cut and just see what that does after I've been making all these decisions. So it's a very free-flowing move and choice for me. I'm constantly messing with that high boost. The low end boost usually stays the same from the beginning because it's how I dial in the 808 or the bass and the kick drum is with that choice that I've made to go either 2, 4, you know, whatever the boost is. I can't really change it after that. So it's hard to, at least. So if I do, that's like a whole gain structure reorientating circumstance.
A little more on this EQ real quick. So is everything bell curve? Are there shelves, or is the top one a filter? What's the
No idea.
No idea.
No idea.
It's just what sounds good with this with the
I'm
VT
assuming
Fern.
it's a shelf, but I have no idea. I'm assuming it's a high shelf, low shelf. The cut is a bell for sure. The mid cut is definitely a and the Q changes frequency, dip dependent, amount dependent. I think it gets wider as you do more. So I only do -2 or 0 because it starts getting too wide and doing too much, which is a really great tracking thing. Like if you're recording with that, I bet you can be really specific with dialing in a vocal sound or a bass sound with that EQ by hollowing things out in the mid range. But on a mixed bus, it's a little too heavy handed.
So there's something that people can look into further if they're not familiar. Different styles of EQs will respond differently as they boost or cut. And there's a few different versions of that. People should just Google it. And what you're talking about with that high frequency where you're boosting or you're cutting here but boosting here. Wait, I can't remember. Is the higher one boosting? The higher one's cutting. the up at like 24K you're cutting, and then
28K.
28K you're
it's a cut, and the boost is 16.
And 16K. And so the reason to do that is, like we were talking about before, that when you manipulate things with an EQ, analog, but also plugins emulate this and do it, I think, just by the math of how you equalize something. It changes the phase, which of course changes the frequency response to how we hear things. And as with a lot of these things, this is like a finishing touch, subtle thing, but you love it. And why do it? Because the other question is, why do it not with an analog EQ? I'm sorry, with a plug-in EQ, and then just run it through your VT Fern for the tubes? Like, is there something about the way it EQs just sounds
most
good?
Expensive sounding EQ I've ever heard, and you can turn it all the way up, and it's still musical. It's a very musical EQ. Like, if I wanted to boost all 14 dB, I could. Yeah, and it would sound good. It never sounds harsh on any music. It is the most musical EQ I've ever heard. You can get out of hand with it because it sounds so good, and then it can get too bright. I like to be subtle with it. It's not that subtle, to be honest. It's hard to. It's one of those things that if we could set up a real high quality stream where people could hear the difference, it's not a subtle thing at all. It's worth spending the money on. It's one of those pieces that if you can get, it does a lot. It's hard to describe.
Okay. Well, maybe
so there's no answer to your question. Why not? It doesn't sound like any digital EQ.
Well, the why not is because
it's a musical instrument. But it's more than that. Like, it's a musical instrument itself. It's like, why do you like a Gibson over a Martin? Over a Takamine, you're like, oh, well,
it's the character you like, and it sounds great and achieves what you want. It's another
if someone says to me, hey, like, love the mix. It's a little dark for me. Like, I get your taste, but it's an easy broad stroke. Like, I'm going to still like the type of brightness versus it's not going to get too harsh. So it gives me a little bit more like ego headroom. Like, if you want it to be brighter, I still like it like this versus, that's what you want. And like, I'm doing it with some plugin and it's just sounds harsh and digital. It gives me a little bit more headroom to be okay with people wanting things brighter than I might want them.
Anything else on your mix bus consistently?
Yeah. So we didn't get through. So that's the first thing. And then I have three more things. One of them is in bypass. I have Saturn, the original Fab Filter Saturn, in the HQ mode, which is an oversample mode that is bypassed. So I'm not using the saturation circuit, but when it's engaged and bypassed, the oversample mode is still engaged. And there's something that I've tried to take it off because I'm a minimalist. I don't want anything on it. I don't need. But everyone that's A-B'd it with me is like, what the fuck? So I have a bypassed plugin on my mix bus. That's a secret.
Is it bypassed?
I talked about in one interview I did once.
Is it bypassed within the plugin?
It's not true bypass. Yes, it's not inactive.
So not bypassed in Pro Tools, but bypassed in the plugin controls itself.
The plugin is bypassed, but it's not inactive.
So the bands are bypassed.
The plugin itself is bypassed, so it's blue. It's blue. But that does not. Yeah, exactly. This person read about it in Sound on Sound. I didn't want to talk about it too much, but a couple people know about this. It's a bypassed plugin, but it doesn't bypass the engagement of the oversampling.
Right.
And the oversampling in that, to me, makes something more 3D.
Gives you more headroom or something.
When I bypass it, it doesn't sound as good. And I've done this with a lot of people. Yeah, bypass is not true bypass. Like, a lot of pieces of gear are not true bypass. Bypass on a plugin is not, because if it's engaged and there's a sound of the plugin, that sound is still there. But whatever you're adding to it after that will not be. The bands will not be engaged. So I have a bypass plugin on my mix bus. Let's just move on from that. Let's not talk about that anymore.
Basically, it's an oversampling tool, which potentially allows for more headroom.
I don't
like the way it sounds.
On anything else, really. Very rarely do I oversample on anything else, and that's a thing that I think people think they're supposed to do, and they don't because their CPU can't handle it. You should be really picky with where and when you oversample, because oversampling can mess with transients and punch.
Yeah,
soften things and round.
It does
things.
Weird things sometimes.
It can make things sound more obscured, which could be good. Like I've talked about with you, sometimes I oversample background vocal bus but not the lead. So the lead is punchy, but the background's just a little bit smoothed out.
Same with like multiband compression, other things where you want something to be obscured. So there's tools,
so there's tools for that in a positive sense. After that, I have Ozone.
Wait, so somebody asked on here, it's important, is it only Saturn version 1 does? You don't use... Weird.
No, it's not the same. It's actually very different. They don't even have a high quality button. In the new one, it's a number. It's a choice. So
it's a multiple.
They changed their thing. So good question. I've tried it in Saturn 2. There's something about it, and it's one thing I want to be really honest about. I wish it wasn't on my mix bus. Like, I hate looking at it. I had to send a session today to some producers to add a featured vocal before something I got to mix this afternoon. Yeah. And I'm like, they're gonna see my Saturn. Like, that's one of those things I'm a little bit weird and insecure about, but it sounds better when it's on. Anyway, so that's that. But don't forget, like, if you have an assistant that forgets and by accidentally unbypasses it, Saturn is terrible on the mix bus. Take that shit off. Like, be careful.
It's a lot.
You know? So then I have Ozone. Ozone has a slight amount of imaging from 440 hertz and up in 2 split bands. I believe it's between 440 and 2.5. I don't remember. I'm not going to actually tell you. It's 2 bands, but it's bypassed below 440. I don't want to touch anything below that. That's where I've decided, like, I mean, you can go down to like 420, but below that, things in the low mids get really weird and abstract and not in a cool way.
Do you ever center the low?
Never center. No. Never center. No. Just mix your shit right. You don't have to center anything. So then there's a slight amount of imaging, not on the all image, just on the band specific. Because then there's that other button that you click on that does widening, like percentage based, like the H3000. I'm not using the widener. That's off. Fuck that thing. That
what
takes
are you
out
using?
your center. Just the band specific. It's different. It's a different algorithm. You're not introducing any stereo eyes. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. No stereo eyes. Okay. So a little bit of that. Very subtle. Like a couple of numbers. 2, 4. Nothing crazy. Not 50. Not 100. Like, very subtle. Then after that is a spectral shaper between 2K and 5K.
You paused for a second. Say that one more time. Spectral shaper?
Spectral shaper between 2 and 5K. That is for a handicap. I like to just have it there just so I don't have to do too many specific moves in that, just because I don't like that frequency being too loud. We've talked about the Fletcher-Munson curve in previous episodes. We have a lot of headroom there. Our ears perceive that stuff 3 to 6 dB louder anyway. So I control that area on the mix bus very subtly. Again, the needle or the meter doesn't move really, but I can adjust broad stroke tone control in that area. So like if I want something to be warmer, I'll go lower on the tone control. And then if someone says, hey, love this mix, but I'm missing some high mid energy, I can give them more of that with one slider. So I can send back a mix within 5 minutes, like if that's the note or if that's the overall feeling that someone's getting, like maybe I went too far. So I set these things up on my mix bus to give me broad stroke capability to make people happier quicker. That's kind of what it's for. Then I have the maximizer. That's not doing anything really. It's at minus 0.1 on the threshold. And then I have a ceiling. So I use it for the ceiling. The ceiling is what's controlling my output into my clipper, which comes next, which is the T-Rex clipper. So those two are in tandem together. I like to control the last bit of output into the clipper by the ceiling. I think that the maximizer gives some width to things. It's like some mysterious, in stereo, not mid-side. Nothing's mid-side that we're talking about. Let's specify. I don't do any mid-side. Definitely not in the mix bus. Oh my God, that's a disaster. I hate when a mastering engineer does mid-side on my mixes too, and it's audible. It's like, don't do that shit.
Yeah.
Do it on individual buses or tracks if you need, but don't do
Again, like background vocals, things you want to obscure because that's what it's going to do.
So T-Rax clipper, and that's it. That's the end. And I'm doing a couple of dB in the clipper instead of limiting. I don't have a limiter on the mix bus to get things loud. I'm using a clipper, and I control the amount of clipping and the sound of the clipping by the maximizer's ceiling. So I can get things cleaner into the clipper and just kind of back and forth, up and down, hearing how it's hitting my tubes. And I just constantly changing gain structure subtly to get it to be as clean as possible with a little bit of that clipping sound that's really desirable. Yeah.
Okay, so that's great. So a bunch of follow-up questions. So it sounds like you have 2, maybe 3 tools that add up to a mix bus EQ if and when you need it. You have your VT Fern thing, which is sort of adds a particular thing that is pretty consistent across your mixes, although you adjust a little bit. You have Spectral Shaper to adjust some mid-range stuff. Yep. Are there any other low-end EQ tools you use on the mix bus, or it's just okay? I know a lot of people
do that in the mix.
Yeah, exactly. So I was gonna say a lot of people I know are asking about mix bus EQ and things like that, and it's all pretty subtle because if you can get that right in the mix and in the sounds going into the mix bus. If I want my bass
to have more 60 hertz, I do it in the bass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not on the mix bus.
One of the questions, actually, I think a couple people asked it, how loud do you deliver your mixes? Do you deliver the reference and then do you take off the clipping for mastering? Do you leave it on?
Leave it on. And someone asked about the ceiling on T-Rax. Yeah, my ceiling's at -0.1 or -0.2 before it goes to mastering. It stays on. I have a great relationship with Dale Becker, who does most of my mastering, and I will play him a mix before I'm sent it a lot of the times to the artist, even so he knows how much clipping. And every once in a while, it's like, hey, it's a little fuzzy. Like, what if you try lower? You know, so we actually collaborate even before that. What was the other question?
Loudness.
Loudness. Minus 10 to -8, depending on the rough. That -8 on the loud front if I have to, and -10 is is my goal most of the time.
And that's delivering
maybe 9.5.
That's delivering to mastering, and then you'll get back something that's a little louder, or that's to clients.
Probably not, depending on the who else is mixing on the album. Then maybe, like if I'm like later in the game and there's already a bunch of Serban mixes on the album that have been mastered, like on this project that I just delivered today, Serban and Manny mixed on it, and the mastering engineer Nathan Dantzler was telling me that one of my mixes that's more of a ballad and actually more open is smashed between 2 smashed Serban and Manny mixes, and he had to get an extra 1 dB, and I was like, oh, it sounds, and I heard it, and it sounds great. Like, sure, he needed to bring it to -9, and I delivered it -10, like whatever, and he did it really tastefully, and it sounds great. He didn't lose any low end for it. However, Nathan did some magic work on this, to be honest.
That's great.
And then, sometimes that happens. I'm the team player, so if they already mixed a lot of the record and I'm coming in with 4 songs, like I got to bend the knee to them,
We're talking about LUFS. We're talking about LUFS to the person that just asked that.
But vice versa to me, if I mix 7 out of 10 songs on an album and someone else is doing 3, I would hope that they would fall in line to the loudness level we are. Maybe theirs is too loud and we're delivering a -9, -10. Like maybe we can have that conversation, and that happens too.
There's lots of great follow-up questions here on the chat, but I would say all these people, let's go to the Discord after. We'll talk more about this stuff.
We have a few more minutes. Can you ask the worst question that someone asked?
The thing is, they're not terrible questions. They're just questions that you don't want to answer.
No, all right. It's got to be like a really bad question in there.
Well,
somewhere.
First off, let me since we're on the Discord real quick, why haven't you come on the Discord yet? I really haven't forced you to. That's the answer.
That's an awful question. No, I don't know why. I'm not really on devices more than I have to be. So
you don't need another. You don't need another thing giving you notifications and all that. But
and I don't want to communicate all the time. I love doing this weekly. I love doing my podcast weekly. I'll come on the Discord sometime. I don't know what that means. Like I don't know what it means to be on it. Like is my face there? Am I typing? Like
I'll explain it to you later.
I don't even know what it means.
That's a proper answer. You got enough stuff going on. 2 podcasts. All right, let's see. Best way to add air to a vocal.
Filter the stuff you don't want.
What about adding? Would you use Spectre?
You don't have to add
to get air. Just take out all the take all the stuff that's not air.
Start there. Answer. If you need something to add, yeah, sure. If you want an answer to the actual question, yes. Spectre in warm or clean mode.
Yeah, the tube mode's not bad either.
It's a little bit even order. It's a little odd order harmonic, more like a guitar type of tube, and it sounds good in mids. In the top end, it's a little bit obscure and not clean. If you want air is typically like a more clean desire.
Okay, so this was the other main question, and there were so many different versions of it. I'm not sure exactly how to ask it, but the main thing was, what does it cost to have Jon Castelli mix? What do I charge? What do people charge? What do mixers get paid? What are the economics?
Oh, I love this question because nobody talks about this.
Nobody talks about it.
I charge $3,500 a mix plus an $800 studio fee per song, and then anything over 10 songs down to negotiate some sort of deal. Nobody talks about that. That's where I'm at. That's what I charge.
Yeah. And your impression and my impression is that there's a handful of guys, maybe a dozen, that charge more than that, but also the structures are pretty different, where there's people who charge
and a point. Sorry, we should add that.
And a royalty point. We've talked about that a lot. Yeah. There are a handful of guys whose names are famous out there that charge either a little bit more or a larger studio fee, which is like a day rate basically for the studio. Some people will charge for revisions. I know you don't do that. I don't do that.
No revision charges. Yeah.
And then there's and of course, as with most things in the music industry, that's what you think, but there's revision charges. There's a larger studio fee. Yeah, the reality is it's actually really great that you answered the question that way. But as you know, and as I know, all things are variable and relative, and you don't like to take, you have a philosophical thing where you don't like to do discounted things except for very specific circumstances. You would actually rather say, I'm going to mix a couple of things for free a year.
Yep.
And rather than try to have everything be a devalued negotiation for things. There are, but the truth is that every project is different, and you may be excited about something and want to be involved early on when they don't have money, and you might have a different back end. I mean, certainly I do a lot more of this as a producer and as a writer, where depending on where the project is, if I'm excited to be involved, I may get no money up front and a big pile of money if they get a deal, or I might get a larger royalty, or I might have rights to, I'll do 3 or 4 songs, but I'll have rights to produce a couple of songs on their first major label album or whatever it is. Like, there's lots and lots of ways to do this. There are, like I said, there's a few mixer guys, including guys like Manny and Serban and whatever, that are in that range or a little bit above. But again, the fee structure tends to be different based on the project. Everybody's got kind of a standard thing, and then everybody is flexible based on what they want to do.
What is that? What do people keep asking? What the studio fee means?
What does that mean?
What does it mean? It's the cost to for my assistant and my average time per song that the studio has to flow, a stem printing time that is downtime, or for all different things.
So why not just?
I have to upkeep a studio, so the label can pay for that. You know,
so you're charging.
There's always a studio budget. There's always a record budget.
So I think it's more of an accounting thing than anything else. It's like if you're $3,500 a mix and $600 for studio, why not just charge $4,100 a mix? And I think there's lots of answers for that, but one of them is
that would be $4,300. But yeah,
I don't do math. Well, you give them a discount. $4,300. Thank you.
I heard you have a kill fee too. Ixnay that from anybody's brain. No, there's no kill fee. I don't know what is the
kill fee for people that?
Yeah, kill fee is like if they don't use your mix, they
still have to pay you something.
No, you have to pay for the mix.
So just real quick, the reason why people oftentimes have separate fees. Sometimes
don't devalue the work that you put in that someone asked you to do for a kill fee. You did the work, and once they engage you in revisions, once you do notes, like, we're moving forward as if the mix is going to be used. If the song doesn't come out, that's another conversation. Like, if it's not getting used, I still get paid for it, but I can understand why, depending on the circumstances, you might be willing to just be like, don't worry about it. But there's no kill fee. The fee is the fee of the song, and it's agreed upon, and I don't really start until I get the front end and
Well, you're also at that point, and we've talked a bit before, and we may go a little over here, which is fine.
Do I charge studio fees if you're doing it for free? No, it's free.
No. Well, so let me just cover two things real quick. One is that I think a lot of people are still in the place where it's like, should I do a spec thing? And the answer is it depends where you are in your career and all these things. You know, John, you've certainly and I have established ourselves to where there's not a lot of spec stuff. I'll do more things in production where I'll take a shot at something because I'm excited about it, and sort of like be like, you should hire me because I can do a better thing. But in mixing, you're past that point in your career. Although occasionally you've done some mixes and they've not went out.
I'll be honest. The only artist I would do a spec mix for, if the A&R hears this, Rihanna.
Yeah.
I'll do anything for Rihanna.
That sounds about right. I'll do anything for Rihanna. That's the quote of the whole thing. So somebody asked in there the 50-50 and recoupable and stuff like that. So that's part of the reason that you have a studio fee separate, at least for some people. I don't know you personally, but having a studio fee separate has nothing to do with your advance or fee as a mixer, which is oftentimes 50% recoupable against royalties. The reason to have a separate studio thing is because historically there are budgets for it. It's part of the accounting that exists in the music industry. Before everybody had their own home studios, you would pay a mixer, but you'd have to pay for the studio as well oftentimes. So a lot of this stuff is
it's funny.
So a lot of this stuff is more of an accounting thing than anything else. But so when somebody like so-and-so charges $5,000 a mix, and people say that could be they charge $4,000 and $1,000 studio fee, or it's $3,000 and a bunch of revisions, or whatever it is. So if people want to dig into that, there's sort of like accounting honestly, and business structure reasons.
Honestly, I didn't realize how hungry people were for this stuff. The comments are blowing up right now with the idea like, nobody talks about this. We should talk about this more. I'm completely open. I'm also completely open to negotiating with people. But that's where I've positioned myself and my team has, my managers. Like, this is where we think that we should start at. And that's something that people need to discuss more openly. I don't want to talk about what other people get. I'm not interested in what Manny gets. That's his business. That's his choice. But I'll talk about, my choices and why and how we got there. So we can do another episode talking about this stuff.
I think we should do that
because there's a lot here. There's a lot here that I have a hard out. I have to go today. So
that's all good. Yeah. And mine gets really crazy too, because I've produced records and mixed records and mastered records and consulted for a record label as an A&R and managed bands and executive produce and all that. And they're all structured differently, all different ways, all have potentials of royalties, fees, recoupable.
Let's do a chat on this. Let's do that next week.
Do you have 2 minutes?
No, I gotta go.
Okay. Well, the last one was what's the most embarrassing meal you've ever made?
Ooh, overcooked salmon. Never overcooked salmon.
Oh, that's such a good, quick answer. Overcooked fish. Thank you guys so much for doing this. John, obviously, thank you. I love you. This is great. We did do a full music business episode at one point, but maybe we can do another one. Hit us on the Discord. I'm going to go on there after and chat. I'm sure there's going to be lots of follow-ups. People are going to go crazy for this one because you just basically laid it all out, which is great, which is really 80% of the questions were, what does John actually do? So there you go. Thank you guys. Share it with somebody who will like it. Peace, guys.
Yeah. Peace.